Hello once again everyone, and welcome back. Over the past few weeks as I developed this guide, Burning Arrow has started to gain some traction, and now I'll be adding fuel to that fire with my iteration. The original archetype was popularized by this forum guide, which you can find in the description. With every volley of Burning Arrow, inflict ignites that rapidly spread between enemies, instantly incinerating entire screens, freeing full legions, and even spreading off-screen to kill enemies you'll never even see. Vaal Burning Arrow's wickedly strong ignite and Burning Arrow's stacking debuff allow the build to deal immense single target damage, shredding through some of the toughest bosses in the game in no time. The overall playstyle is both simple and consistent, with very few active skills and a relatively low reliance on Flasks for damage output. Defensively, the build is reasonably durable. Its ability to safely engage from a distance, combined with the convenience of dealing damage over time, allows it to easily handle most content. It has full elemental ailment immunity, strong physical damage reduction, solid chaos resistance, some dodge and evade chance, a powerful 2000 plus primal aegis, and fantastic sustain through significant life regen and life gain on ignite and kill. If you want to invest more heavily into the build's defensive capabilities, I'll be covering a variety of alternative options that can add major defensive layers. With significant defensive investment, this should be doable in hardcore, but there are safer picks out there. Gearing up relies heavily on a variety of uniques, making this difficult to recommend for solo self-found. In trade, many of the required items are usually very affordable. However, demand has been high this league. Achieving the level of damage output seen in the footage will take meaningful investment, with most of the expense stemming from the many jewels and cluster jewels the build utilizes. Though I've seen this pushed as a league starter repeatedly, for most players I wouldn't recommend it. This is so much better as a second character. If you secure the core items before switching over, you'll have a drastically smoother experience. This guide uses the Path of Building community fork, known as POB, to summarize its key information. Copy in the pastebin link found below for access to a thorough library of gem setups, gear sets, and skill trees for every investment level. I'll be updating the POB link for each new league. Changes will be in the POB notes and video description. And if you end up enjoying the guide, consider throwing it a like and subbing to the channel. Now let's get started by taking a look at the core mechanics. Burning Arrow will be used for both clearing and bossing. It applies a strong ignite, an elemental ailment that scales off the base damage of a hit to deal fire damage over time for a short duration. Multiple ignites can be applied to a single enemy, but only the strongest ignite will actively deal any damage. Burning Arrow also applies a secondary burning debuff when an enemy is ignited. The secondary debuff's DPS is equal to 40% of the original ignite's DPS, and crucially can be stacked up to 5 times, allowing Burning Arrow to deal immense single target damage. Its Vaal counterpart can be used against bosses to push this damage even further by inflicting a much more powerful ignite than the regular Burning Arrow. Barracks Respite is the catalyst behind our ridiculous clear speed. When an ignited enemy is killed, it will spread an equivalent ignite to every nearby enemy. Where ignite proliferation fails, this effect continues to propagate as new enemies die from the spreading ignite, often causing multiple packs or entire league mechanics to be vaporized by a single shot. Our Ascendancy of Elementalist opens up a world of options for scaling damage and defensive capability. Normally, only a hit's fire damage would contribute to the strength of the resulting ignite. However, our first Ascendancy node, Shaper of Flames, guarantees that our hits will ignite and allows any type of hit-based damage to do so. This is a massive deal and functions as the engine of the build. Items that provide chunks of extra damage and large rolls of flat damage to attacks become incredibly powerful. Even with significant investment into other types of damage, the primary damage type of our hits will still be fire, causing Shaper of Flames to also grant our ignites a substantial 25% more damage. With our second and third Ascendancy nodes, Golems become the focus. Liege of the Primordial and Elemancer combine to grant these benefits, increasing our maximum Golem count, the effect of each Golem's buff, and our damage output as well. Our Golems are also made immune to elemental damage and will be automatically resummoned if they die. And with at least 3 Golems active, we'll be granted full elemental ailment immunity, a fantastic defensive layer that allows us to ignore a variety of dangerous effects. With full investment into Golems, we can have up to 9 active at once, causing these 2 nodes to grant in total 225% increased damage and 450% increased Golem buff effect. We'll be running these Golems. Each one provides a unique and beneficial buff, granting the build tons of life regen, crit chance, accuracy rating, physical damage reduction, increased damage, and attack speed. Having more than one Golem of a single type active does not increase the buff it grants. Many players may want to run Malachai's Artifice with Lightning Golem socketed into it, granting it elemental equilibrium. Any enemies that the Lightning Golem strikes will be granted plus 25% their lightning resistance, and minus a staggering 50% to their fire and cold resistances, a ridiculous damage boost that will prove especially beneficial against bosses. If you're running this setup, summon one of every other golem, and as many lightning golems as possible, increasing the consistency of inflicting elemental equilibrium. If you aren't running Malachai's Artifice, simply summon your golems evenly. Our final Ascendancy node is Bastion of Elements, which provides complete immunity to reflected elemental damage, and grants Primal Aegis, a protective shield that is scaled by the amount of notables allocated on the skill tree. This was slightly nerfed with the arrival of 3.14, and will now cap out for most players somewhere in the low 2000s. While active, it will absorb all elemental damage before it hits our life. If no elemental damage is taken for a short time, or the Aegis is depleted, it will be restored to full power after a small delay. Even after the nerf, this is a strong defensive layer that significantly improves the build's durability. I recommend picking up your Ascendancies in this order. Across the skill tree and gear, we'll be primarily scaling each of these modifiers, using an initial endgame skill tree that looks like this. The build is completely life-based and invests accordingly. Our only direct keystone is Elemental Overload, which grants a staggering 40% more damage if we've dealt a critical strike in the last 8 seconds. With our focus resting solely on Ignite DPS rather than dealing critical strikes, this is an incredibly powerful keystone. Ice Golem alone provides enough crit chance to make it viable. Several of our key items require a lot of dexterity. Don't hesitate to allocate these plus 30 dexterity nodes for as long as necessary. A variety of jewels play a massive role in optimizing the build's performance. Here's a progression of skill trees that scale with investment level, eventually resulting in an optimized tree like this. We'll begin with the most affordable options and work our way up. A cheap, well-rolled Mantra of Flames scales off of our many buffs, including Golems, to provide a ton of flat fire damage to our attacks. Flexibly priced, Searching Eye jewels can provide lots of life and flat damage to attacks, alongside a variety of other beneficial modifiers. Try to secure a roll of flat accuracy rating, ideally 200 or more. When combined with Ice Golem's buff, this should be enough to cap your hit chance completely. A cheap to moderately priced Lethal Pride can provide serious value in this socket. All nodes within its radius will be granted an additional modifier. Minor passives will be granted Strength, and each of these notables we have allocated will be granted one of these listed modifiers at random, with the result being determined by the numerical seed found here. The jewel's name variation is irrelevant for our purposes and should be ignored. We're really only looking for these modifiers, which grant things like life, stronger ignites, endurance charges, and other defensive benefits. Don't look for an exact seed. The easiest way to get a good result is to divine a jewel, testing it each time until you land at least 3 or 4 desirable modifiers. Once you've secured a primordial chain, you'll want to invest into an expensive Anima Stone and 2 cheap primordial eminence. The Anima Stone always provides 1 additional maximum golem, and grants another if you're running 3 primordial items. Each primordial eminence counts towards that total, and grants 30% increased golem buff effect. An expensive Watcher's Eye offers a ton of power and can impact our choice of auras. Look for 1, or if you have the currency, 2 of the listed aura-based modifiers. Malevolence modifiers are top priority. An expensive Transcendent Mind can be placed into this socket to gain a ridiculous amount of damage over time multiplier. Finally, cluster jewels are absolutely crucial to the build's performance. The setups featuring them can be slowly expanded as you obtain more jewels. Medium fire damage over time multiplier cluster jewels, featuring 2 of these notables, are the primary focus. The most desirable combination is Blowback and Cooked Alive. However, this may prove very expensive, and there are plenty of other combos that provide a similar level of power. In order to maximize the number of medium clusters we can run, 8 passive large cluster jewels are also required. These can either be minion or fire damage focused. Minion damage jewels should only feature 2 notables, one being the golem focused primordial bond, and the other being Raise and Pillage, Renewal, or Rod and Claws. This pushes primordial bond to the front, allowing us to get a single exceptionally powerful notable in the 2 jewel sockets with as little point investment as possible. Alternatively, 3 notable fire damage large clusters featuring a combination of these notables can also do great work. Now let's discuss how to properly pilot the build. Here are the keybinds I used. Treat this as a baseline to be modified as you see fit. Here are the troublesome map modifiers to keep in mind. Almost every modifier is doable, but some can prove annoying. The only outlier is monsters have a chance to avoid elemental ailments. While technically possible to run, it's much better to avoid this modifier completely. During general gameplay, always stay on the move and flame dash often. Avoid doubling back too quickly to avoid on-death effects and delayed attacks. Maintain consistent flask uptime, especially your mana flask. Always engage from a safe distance when possible. Shots can even be fired off-screen to eliminate threats ahead of you. Applying debuffs and using Vaal Burning Arrow is generally reserved for bosses, but can be utilized if necessary. Against the average boss, just stay at a safe distance, pop your flasks, and hit them once with Vaal Burning Arrow to apply our most powerful ignite, and follow up by repeatedly hitting them with the regular Burning Arrow to build up stacks of its secondary debuff. Most bosses can't withstand this for long. As you engage a powerful boss, apply Stormbrand if you're running it to proc Elemental Overload, hit them once with Wave of Conviction to curse them, and lower their resistances with Fire Exposure and Combustion. Pop your flasks and hit the boss once with Vaal Burning Arrow to apply our most powerful ignite, and follow up with the regular Burning Arrow until 5 stacks of its secondary debuff have been applied. From then on, focus on avoiding incoming damage. Keep the boss at a safe distance, while firing occasional burning arrows into the fray if necessary. If the fight is long, keep your flasks up anytime you're actively dealing full bursts of damage. Carefully manage the use of your mana flask, never fully deplete it. Against uber endgame bosses that summon very few additional mobs, consider swapping out GMP for Swift Affliction. This will make Burning Arrow tougher to land, but with accurate shots, the damage increase is massive. And if you want to play it safe, drop your Quicksilver Flask for a second Enduring Mana Flask. I recommend leveling the build as a caster using gem setups like these, although you can level with Burning Arrow or convert after unlocking the library. For a smooth experience, I recommend most players get through the axe before swapping over, ideally directly into as many of the core endgame items as possible. Here's our progression of leveling skill trees. The beneficial leveling uniques I recommend running, and the flasks you should be using. None of the bandits are compelling options. I recommend killing all of them for the 2 passive points. For our major god, I heavily recommend Lunaris, as it provides projectile avoidance, some attack and spell dodge, and prevents projectiles from chaining off of our golems into us. And for the minor god, I recommend running Rislatha for improved life flask recovery and uptime. Now let's break down the skill gems, beginning with our 6th link Vaal Burning Arrow, socketed directly into Zoph's Nurture, which automatically supports all socketed gems with level 20 Ignite Proliferation, effectively creating a powerful 7-link. For Ignite Proliferation, burning damage, deadly ailments, elemental damage with attack skills, and unbound ailments, the name of the game is more damage. It all scales our Ignite DPS. The final support gem will differ. GMP causes Burning Arrow to fire a total of 5 projectiles. This significantly improves the consistency of our clear speed and makes hitting single targets easier, all without negatively impacting the power of our ignites. As you accumulate currency, slowly incorporate these many awakened support gems. Next, our 4-link debuff setup. Wave of Conviction is a spell that inflicts elemental exposure based upon the highest type of elemental damage dealt. When leveled, this should always be fire, lowering enemies' fire resistance by 15%. Wave of Conviction will inflict a weak ignite onto enemies it hits. Combustion support will then lower their fire resistance by another 20%. Hex Touch causes Wave of Conviction to inflict a linked curse on hit. If you're running Malachi's Artifice, I recommend choosing Despair, and if you're not running it, go with Flammability instead. Next, our flexible 4-link utility setup, which features one of these 2 guard skills, either a low-level automatically casted Immortal Call, or the manually casted max-level Steel Skin, optionally linked to increase duration. The remaining sockets can feature a variety of skills. Blood Rage is a buff that once activated is refreshed every time we get a kill. It slightly drains our life, in return granting attack speed and consistent frenzy charges on kill. Stormbrand can be attached to bosses to consistently activate Elemental Overload. Flame Wall adds flat fire damage to Burning Arrow projectiles that pass through it, providing a decent but inconvenient damage boost. Vaal Grace offers a serious burst of dodge chance on demand, and if necessary, these sockets can hold golems you can't fit elsewhere. Alternatively, if you can spare the sockets, a setup like this will cause cast when damage taken to also frequently cast a 5 projectile ball lightning that will inflict weak ignites onto everything nearby, granting impressive life recovery during intense encounters. Next, our 4-link aura and movement setup. Malevolence grants more damage over time, and Wrath grants a gigantic amount of flat lightning damage to attacks. Anger is a strong alternative, but remember, if you're running Malachi's Artifice, do not run it. It will cause your lightning golem to deal fire damage, ruining elemental equilibrium. Link both to an enlightened support between levels 3 and 4. If you can't afford one, temporarily allocate the left side of the Sovereignty cluster to free up enough mana. Place Flame Dash into the final socket to serve as your movement skill. Alternatively, a more defensive setup will feature Malevolence alongside Flesh and Stone, permanently in Sand Stance for consistent blind and reduced damage taken from faraway enemies, and Vitality for some extra life regen, level this only as high as you can comfortably run. Finally, our Golem setup, socketed directly into our body armor. This is flexible and doesn't need to be 6-linked. If you're running Malachai's Artifice, Lightning Golem will be socketed there instead. Any extra sockets can be used for utility skills. Eventually, you can expand the setup to a 5 or even 6-link with the inclusion of a level 3 or 4 in power, which will increase the gem level and resulting strength of our Golems buffs, particularly the Chaos and Stone Golems. This is a low priority upgrade. And if you're using Here's Ire, a setup like this will be much easier to initially color. Temporarily move some Golems to other setups by swapping green utility gems like Blood Rage over here, and by running Dash linked to Second Wind rather than Flame Dash. Now it's finally time to cover the gear. Remember, Path of Exile's economy is player driven. Prices are at the mercy of supply and demand and will vary over time. I'll be using these categories to better estimate the future cost of the items discussed. Let's begin with our bow. If you swapped over to Burning Arrow early, you can initially run one of these affordable uniques, or a rare bow with several high rolls of elemental damage, before upgrading to our best-in-slot bow, Zoph's Nurture, which will be cheap unlinked, and very expensive fully 6-linked. It hits hard, expands our Burning Arrow setup to a powerful 7-link, and recovers tons of life when we ignite enemies, maximize the physical damage and life on ignite rolls. If necessary, utilize the cheap Prophecy, Jeweler's Touch, for an instant 5-link. And if you have serious currency, look for these corruptions. Next, our Quiver. A penetrating arrow base is ideal for the additional pierce. Across all of your gear, you'll want to secure 2 or more pierces. Early on, you can run a cheap unique, like Drill Neck or Here's Demise, before eventually upgrading to a flexible rare. Life and relevant damage over time multipliers are your top priority. An optimized Quiver will be hunter influenced and expensive, with double dot multi, life, ideally at least 1 pierce, and any extra offensive or utility based modifiers you can cram in. Alternatively, a rear guard is dirt cheap and can be combined with Rumi's Concoction to easily achieve 44% attack block, 25% spell block, and significantly improved physical damage reduction at the cost of damage. Our helmet will begin as a flexible rare, focused on life, resistances, and dexterity. With an open prefix, you can craft an additional pierce, eventually upgrade to a Blizzard Crown, a shockingly powerful new base type that adds an absolute ton of cold damage to our attacks. Alternatively, the expensive Ascendancy chant can automatically trigger skills. While convenient, this is largely unnecessary, as a similar effect can be achieved by manually casting Wave of Conviction on bosses ourselves. Regardless of your choice, as a high-end upgrade, look for one of these enchantments. There are plenty of solid options, but nothing compares to the Burning Arrow debuff effect, which dramatically improves single target damage. Our body armor can take several forms. A 6-link isn't required. If you're low on currency, pick up your body armor unlinked. A variety of affordable uniques can do good work. Belly of the Beast and Perfect Form both provide significant defensive power. Loreweave is solid all around. A flexible rare can provide a ton of the life, resistances, and dexterity we require, as well as several strong but expensive defensive modifiers. Finally, Here's Ire is an easy recommendation. It's ridiculously cheap and offers lots of evasion rating, 10% attack and spell dodge, and a monstrous amount of cold damage to attacks. When well rolled, this results in a ridiculous damage boost. For anyone drowning in currency, look for these corruptions. Our gloves are flexible rares. Early on, just look for life, dexterity, and resistances. Eventually, upgrade to a rare that also features some of these expensive offensive modifiers. With an open prefix, you can again craft an additional pierce. For boots, at least early on, you can run cheap uniques. Voidwalker provides 5 pierces. Its Eerie Step is solid all around. Aberrath Hooves provide a similar effect to Barrack's Respite, but don't offer much else. And of course, a flexible rare with solid life, movement speed, resistances, and if needed dexterity can do good work. Eventually upgrade to an expensive hunter-influenced rare that also features modifiers like faster ignites and additional pierces. Enchant your boots with one of these. Any of the elemental damage options provide fantastic conditional power, and the increased critical strike chance will heavily improve Elemental Overload's uptime. Our amulet can begin as a flexible rare if necessary. Ultimately, you'll want to run the moderately priced and best-in-slot Primordial Chain, which grants 3 additional maximum golems. When combined with our golem ascendancies, 3 extra golems is a big deal. If you have the currency, look for these corruptions. Be sure to anoint your amulet with one of these options. I heavily recommend the offensively focused Burning Brutality. Alternatively, to free up more mana, choose Charisma. For more dexterity, Utmost Swiftness. For more pierces, Piercing Shot. For endurance charges, Disciple of the Unyielding. Or for life, one of these. For rings, the expensive Barracks Respite is just about required, as it makes an absolute world of difference to our clear speed. Alongside it, I recommend the cheap Malachi's Artifice, which provides a ton of single target damage. Alternatively, Pyre and Namahu's Sign are good temporary budget options. A rare ring can also provide great value. Prioritize life, resistances, dexterity, and elemental damage with attack skills. And finally, the expensive Replica Emberwake increases our fire damage and causes ignites to deal damage as much as 54% faster with the appropriate catalyst. Our belt is the phenomenal Dyadian Dawn. It's cheap, provides a ton of life and resistances, and causes our ignites to deal damage up to 42% faster with the appropriate catalyst, the perfect item to complete our core gear. With that, we've arrived at the flasks. Be sure to quality your selections. First, a cheap Quicksilver flask that grants valuable speed. Look for an additional movement speed suffix, alongside a prefix of either increased effect or increased duration. Second, the cheap Itsiri's Promise, which provides a staggering DPS boost for our ignites and a valuable chunk of chaos resistance. Pick up a well-rolled example. Third, a cheap Enduring Divine Mana Flask of Warding. This combination of modifiers provides consistent curse immunity and a constant flow of mana that allows us to rapidly fire Burning Arrow. Fourth, a cheap Life Flask of Staunching for immunity to bleeding and rapid recovery. Go with your favorite variant, whether that's instant, semi-instant, or just fast recovery. If you can secure Corrupted Blood immunity on a jewel, the Life Flask can optionally be dropped to run one of the unused options from our final slot. The final slot in question can feature a variety of options. A cheap, well-rolled Rumi's Concoction grants a ton of block, spell block, and physical damage reduction, a phenomenal defensive pick. A moderately priced Taste of Hate provides a bit of damage and some powerful damage mitigation. And finally, the expensive Cinder Swallow is my top recommendation. It grants Onslaught, exceptional life recovery on kill, a strong Veiled modifier, and even increases the damage ignited enemies take. Look for one of these variants. With that, I've covered just about everything. I hope you enjoyed the guide. A huge thank you to all of my patrons. Your support makes producing this content possible. Special recognition goes to Adam Banamias, Agent Leo, Andrew Miller, Bacon Overlord, Bloody, Chinmorph, Chris IRL, Christopher Cravey, Daniel Wigg, Demetrius, Evan Jones, Gareth Thomas, Garth Anderson, Glenn G, Greg Wells, Hunter Wild, Ichiro Nimi, It's Mr. Worm to You, Jacob Davey, Jay Guadagnoli, John Gabriel, John Snyder, Kevin Griffin, Kurt Wood, Lame Dog, Lukash Galik, Lazy Burns, Matthias Fremfist, Michael Johnson, Modimus Prime, Nate, Piotr, Rasmus Blockpausko, Ravager Nick, Ray Hill, Richard Bollinger, Ryan McDonald, Sabaton Babylon, Spencer Ripe, Tony G773, Varos Vitele, Wyatt Sabled, Xanth64, Xi, and finally, Zvin. An additional thank you to Jangor, Bacon Overlord, and Monimus Prime. If you'd like to support the channel, receive a credit, or join our Discord, consider checking out the Patreon link below. If you enjoyed the guide, consider throwing it a like and subbing to the channel to be notified when new guides release. And as always, I've been Esero, and I will see you guys in the next video.